Before diving into this incredible story, remember to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Here, every story has something to say, and you won't want to miss a single one. Clara Bennett was a woman known throughout the business world. CEO of Bennett Technologies, a multi-billion-dollar company specializing in artificial intelligence, she had built her empire through sheer determination and bold decisions. Yet, despite her influence, she now faced a situation that no amount of money or prestigious title could solve, at least, not yet. That morning, dressed in a tailored suit and discreet sunglasses, Clara headed towards the Sky Global counter, the airline renowned for its impeccable first-class service. She had reserved the most comfortable seat, not for luxury, but because she had a tight schedule and a crucial meeting in New York. Every minute counted. Upon her arrival, a young agent with a stern look and curt tone greeted her. "Madam, I'm sorry, but your card does not authorize you to board in first class today." Clara stood motionless for a moment, surprised and upset. She had booked and confirmed her ticket weeks in advance. She felt all the passengers' eyes on her, some curious, others visibly annoyed by the scene. She took a deep breath to remain calm. "Excuse me?" she asked, controlling her voice. "I paid for this ticket, and I have all the necessary confirmations. Can you explain why I can't board?" The embarrassed agent mumbled a confused apology but couldn't give her a valid reason. Clara felt her anger rising, but she knew she had to act strategically, not impulsively. She took out her phone and quickly dialed a number. A few rings later, the deep, respectful voice of Samuel Carter, CEO of Sky Global, rang out. "Mr. Carter, this is Clara Bennett. It appears your company is having trouble recognizing its most important clients. I advise you to address this issue immediately." A few hours later, the entire airline was in turmoil. The CEO and several executives had been summoned for questioning. Clara, with a simple phone call, had just reminded the world that even large corporations could be shaken by someone who refused to be treated unfairly. In the airport terminal, passengers who had witnessed the scene murmured, some impressed, others slightly shocked. But for Clara, it wasn't about revenge, it was a lesson in respect, competence, and how power could be used wisely. This first-class flight, unjustly refused, would mark the beginning of a saga in which Clara would show that no one, no matter the size of their company, could ignore the determination of a woman ready to defend what was rightfully hers. The terminal at Chicago's International Airport was buzzing with activity. Clara Bennett walked confidently, her elegant handbag slung over her shoulder, her heels clicking on the marble floor. Each step was precise, measured, like that of a woman who had learned to master the world around her. She arrived at the Sky Global counter, ready to board in first class. The young agent behind the counter looked up, and Clara immediately sensed a slight unease in the air. "Good morning, Mrs. Bennett. May I see your ticket, please?" he asked, in a voice that tried to sound polite. Clara handed over her e-ticket. The agent consulted his screen and frowned. "I'm sorry, madam, but your card does not allow you to board in first class today." Clara blinked in disbelief. "Excuse me? How is this possible? I paid for this seat. Everything is confirmed." The officer lowered his voice and whispered something to his colleague before turning back to her. "It seems there's a technical problem." A murmur rippled through the queue. Some passengers cast curious glances, others offered faint smiles, as if the scene amused them. Clara felt her blood boil, but she took a deep breath. Anger was something she controlled better than anyone. Without raising her voice, she took out her phone and dialed a number she knew by heart. After a few rings, a deep, professional voice answered, "Samuel Carter, CEO of Sky Global." "Clara, implacable, Mr. Carter, it seems your company is having difficulty recognizing its most important clients. We have a problem that I advise you to resolve immediately." The agent behind the counter turned pale when he realized that the woman he was refusing to let on the bus was no ordinary customer. Clara, calm and determined, had just taken control of the situation. A few minutes later, she was on her way to her flight, but she knew that this simple incident would trigger a series of consequences that would shake the entire airline. No sooner had Clara hung up than the atmosphere at the Sky Global counter changed. The agents looked at each other nervously, whispering amongst themselves. The mere mention of a name, Clara Bennett, had been enough to sow panic. The young agent who had turned her down jumped up from his chair and desperately searched for a superior. Behind the scenes, frantic calls were being made. Have you checked her profile? Yes, but she's not joking. Inform the director immediately. Samuel Carter, the general manager, arrived a few minutes later. Tall, charismatic, and usually imperturbable, he immediately sensed that this situation was unlike anything he had ever experienced. What's going on here? He asked, his gaze shifting from the agent at the counter to Clara, already seated in a waiting chair. Clara stared at him calmly. Mr. Carter, I'm here to remind you of a simple rule: respect your clients, and above all, recognize those who allow you to stay in this business. Her voice was firm, but polite, like the edge of a scalpel. The company director felt a shiver of unease. He knew Clara Bennett. Everyone in the business world knew her. A woman capable of bending banks to her will, changing corporate policies, and redefining the market. And she wasn't here to negotiate, but to right a wrong. Meanwhile, the other passengers watched the scene unfold, some discreetly taking photos, others whispering excitedly. The check-in counter had never witnessed such tension. Clara, for her part, remained unperturbed. Her gaze swept around the room, then settled on Carter. I don't just want this problem solved. I want you to understand that every decision has consequences. Even yours. In the director's office, phones rang incessantly. News of the incident spread rapidly on social media. Sky Global employees, now panicked, were already anticipating the CEO's email that would turn their day into a nightmare. At that precise moment, Clara hadn't yet lifted a finger. But the storm she had just unleashed was irresistible. And Samuel Carter knew it. Everything he did from now on would be observed, judged, and, undoubtedly, irreversible. Clara had returned to her seat in the departure lounge, calmly sipping coffee as the flight announcements echoed overhead. But far from relaxing, her mind was racing. She knew that simply refusing a seat was a minor offense for most people, but for her, it was a matter of principle. She had already prepared a list on her phone: key contacts, influential journalists, air traffic controllers. Each name could amplify the pressure. But she decided to start with the heart of the problem: Samuel Carter. She dialed his number a second time. The line was quickly answered. Mr. Carter, good morning. His voice was calm, but behind every word resonated an indisputable authority. Samuel replied, tensely, Mrs. Bennett, I want to apologize for what happened. I don't know how it could have happened. Clara put down her coffee and looked at him through her phone screen, even though she knew he couldn't see her. Mr. Carter, you do understand that this isn't a simple mistake, do you? This isn't about a first-class seat. This is about competence, respect, and responsibility. I expect this matter to be resolved immediately. The director felt his heart beat faster. He knew that every word he uttered would be analyzed. Of course. I'll make sure that's corrected immediately, Ms. Bennett. Clara took a deep breath, a faint smile playing on her lips. I'm not just expecting an apology, Samuel. I want concrete action. You need to review your procedures, train your staff, and... She paused for a few seconds, then finished, I want you to personally take charge of resolving this issue. A few hours later, Clara's phone vibrated again. It was Carter, this time with a different, almost pleading tone. Ms. Bennett, we've reviewed the situation, and we're going to take all the necessary steps. I'm so sorry. Clara smiled inwardly. She knew she had won. But for her, it wasn't just a personal victory. It was the beginning of a lesson for the entire airline industry. Even the biggest companies could fall in the face of determination and principle. That evening, specialized media and social networks were already beginning to report on the incident. Hashtags were circulating, opinions were forming, and in the offices of Sky Global, everyone was preparing for what would become an organizational earthquake. That same evening, Clara returned to her Chicago apartment, but the airport incident remained on her mind. She knew that simply calling the director wasn't enough to get the message across. The entire company needed to feel the impact of her action, but in an effective and strategic way. Meanwhile, Samuel Carter, seated in his luxurious Sky Global office, had urgently convened a meeting with the entire executive committee. Faces were tense, everyone understanding that the situation was more serious than a simple refusal of a seat. Employees had already begun speaking out on social media, and prestigious clients were starting to question the company's professionalism. "Ladies and gentlemen," Carter began, his voice trembling, "we have faced a major incident today. Clara Bennett, CEO of Bennett Technologies, was denied access to her first-class seat. We must immediately correct our procedures and take concrete action." A palpable tension hung in the air. No one dared dispute the fact that this situation could damage the company's reputation for years to come. Customer service and training managers were immediately tasked with reviewing all boarding and VIP passenger reception policies. Meanwhile, from the comfort of her living room, Clara closely followed the first news stories on social media. Posts about the incident were multiplying, some praised her composure, others denounced Sky Global's incompetence. Clara knew this exposure would reinforce her message: respect and competence were non-negotiable. But she didn't stop there. The next step in her plan was subtle: she was going to turn this personal mishap into a public lesson. A few strategic phone calls later, aviation journalists received a confidential memo indicating that the incident with Clara Bennett revealed flaws in Sky Global's VIP service management. The following morning, the airline's offices were already buzzing with activity. Internal inspectors were reviewing every procedure, urgent training sessions were being scheduled, and the board of directors was beginning to consider sanctions against those who had made the decision to refuse Clara. Clara, meanwhile, sipped coffee at her desk, observing the storm she had unleashed. She knew this was just the beginning. The lessons she was about to impose on Sky Global would redefine how the entire airline industry treated its passengers, especially the most influential ones. The next day, Clara Bennett got up early, as usual, but today her phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Notifications were pouring in, news articles, private messages from journalists, reactions on social media. The incident at the airport had taken on a scale she hadn't even anticipated. The specialized and national media were now talking about the Bennett affair, a striking example of how a CEO could expose the flaws of a major airline. The hashtags #SkyGlobalFail and #RespectCustomers were circulating rapidly. VIP customers were beginning to question Sky Global's professionalism. At company headquarters, the pressure was unbearable. Samuel Carter and his team found themselves in an unprecedented situation. Every call, every email received, served as a reminder of the scale of the problem. This was no longer a simple incident to be handled internally. Investors were beginning to worry, business partners were demanding explanations, and frontline staff were under extreme pressure. Carter convened the management committee again. "We can no longer ignore the magnitude of this situation," he admitted. "Every media outlet is talking about us. VIP clients are angry. Drastic decisions are needed." Clara, for her part, observed the situation with calculated calm. She knew that the media frenzy and internal pressure were on her side. She didn't need to threaten, shout, or punish. Her mere influence and the implacable logic of her actions were enough to shift the balance. A few hours later, Carter announced a series of urgent measures. A complete review of all policies: VIP customer boarding and reception. Mandatory training for all staff on the customer service. An internal investigation to identify those directly responsible of the incident. But despite these measures, Clara knew the company needed to go further to avoid future disaster. Meanwhile, the executives were beginning to realize they had underestimated the power of those they considered ordinary customers, and especially the power of a woman like Clara Bennett. As the media continued to report the story, Clara smiled slightly. The message was clear: in the business world, respect and competence are non-negotiable. And those who forget this should expect to pay the price. It had been an intense week for Clara Bennett. The airport incident had gone viral, and each day brought its share of new posts, analyses, and public commentary. But for Clara, it still wasn't enough. If Sky Global truly wanted to learn its lesson, it had to get to the heart of the problem, the company's leadership itself. For his part, Samuel Carter felt the pressure mounting with every passing moment. Investors were demanding answers, VIP clients were threatening to switch airlines, and Sky Global's reputation was now at stake. He knew that the measures taken so far would not be enough to quell the media storm. Clara, sitting in her office, made a decision. She dialed her phone again, this time to the chairman of Sky Global's board of directors. The voice on the other end was polite but tense. "Mr. Green," Clara began, "I think you have underestimated the seriousness of the situation. This is not simply a denied seat. It is a matter of competence, respect, and responsibility." The president of Sky Global sighed, aware that Clara's call would be more than just a pleasantry. "Ms. Bennett, we understand, we will take the necessary steps." Clara didn't smile, she stated her decision calmly and precisely. "I expect your CEO, Samuel Carter, to be immediately relieved of his duties. The company needs leadership capable of respecting its customers and managing crises intelligently. I can assure you that if this decision is not made, the impact on your reputation and your business will be irreversible." The silence on the other end of the line was heavy. After a few seconds, the president confirmed the decision: Carter would be replaced. Clara had just turned a personal setback into a radical change at the top of the company. A few hours later, Sky Global's offices were buzzing with excitement. The official announcement of Samuel Carter's resignation and the appointment of a new CEO came as a bombshell. The employees, still reeling from the shock, understood that the incident with Clara Bennett was not simply an isolated mistake, but a powerful signal. The world had changed, and companies had to adapt. Clara, meanwhile, followed the unfolding situation from her office, a slight smile on her lips. She knew she had just demonstrated that even the largest airlines could be brought to heel by determination and principle. But beyond the personal victory, it was a clear message for the entire industry: respect was non-negotiable. The media were talking about nothing else. Since the announcement of Samuel Carter's replacement, Sky Global had been in the spotlight. Newspapers, specialized websites, and news channels covered the story with catchy headlines: "The CEO who shook up Sky Global, a first-class mistake that cost a CEO," or even, "Clara Bennett, the woman who never lets herself be treated unfairly." Clara closely monitored the unfolding situation from her office, savoring the quiet satisfaction of her success. But she knew that real change didn't stop at newspaper headlines. For her message to resonate, the entire company, from management to the frontline agents, needed to feel the impact of her actions. The atmosphere at Sky Global's offices was electric. Every employee received strict instructions to improve customer service and ensure that no VIP client would ever again be treated the way Clara had been. Training sessions were intensified, and internal audits were launched to identify weaknesses in each department. Meanwhile, social media exploded. The hashtags #SkyGlobalChange and #RespectCustomers were trending. Thousands of customers shared their support for Clara and denounced the negative experiences they had had with the airline. Even airline industry influencers commented on the case, highlighting the need to rethink customer relations across the entire industry. Clara, however, remained unwavering. She knew that real change would only happen if the impact reached every level of the company. Every media announcement, every tweet, every comment served her purpose: to transform a personal mishap into a universal public lesson. Sky Global's new CEO, aware of the significance of the incident, immediately took decisive action. Strict guidelines were implemented to ensure staff adhered strictly to procedures and VIP treatment protocols. The company even began to overhaul its brand image and launch a campaign to regain public trust. Clara watched everything with satisfaction. She had never sought revenge, only respect. And now, thanks to her determination and relentless strategy, she had transformed a frustrating situation into a concrete example of leadership and authority. The media storm had reached its peak, but for Clara, it was only the beginning. The real impact on Sky Global would continue for some time, and the lesson she had just given would resonate in the industry for a long time. A few days after the media storm, Clara Bennett wasn't just observing from afar. She knew that for her message to remain effective, it was necessary to follow the measures put in place and ensure that they were actually implemented. She then contacted Sky Global's new CEO, Margaret Ellis, a leader known for her efficiency and rigor. Clara clearly stated her expectations. I want every employee to understand that customer service is not optional. I want regular reports on staff training and how incidents are handled. Margaret, aware of Clara's influence and the media attention, accepted without hesitation. We will ensure that every procedure is followed, Ms. Bennett. Your incident will be our guide for making lasting improvements to the service. At Sky Global's offices, implementation began immediately. Intensive training sessions were organized for all employees, from check-in staff to pilots. Every procedure was thoroughly reviewed to ensure that no similar situation could occur again. Regular audits were implemented to assess compliance with the new guidelines. Clara followed each step with a mixture of satisfaction and vigilance. She knew that some companies might claim to be changing, but continue making the same mistakes behind the scenes. Thanks to her contacts and network, she could monitor developments and ensure that Sky Global wasn't just putting on a facade. Meanwhile, the press continued to report on the internal changes at Sky Global. Articles praised Clara for her leadership and determination, and the airline was beginning to rebuild its reputation, but this time on solid and respectful foundations. Clara, for her part, was not seeking recognition. Her objective had been achieved. She had transformed a personal injustice into a public lesson, and Sky Global, despite the initial panic, was beginning to truly adapt. As she finished her day, Clara allowed herself a smile. The message had been received, the company was changing, and the lesson of respect and competence now resonated in every corridor of Sky Global. But for Clara, each victory was also a reminder. Remaining vigilant and demanding excellence was the only way to protect her rights and those of others. A few weeks after the incident, Sky Global was no longer the same company. The office corridors, once marked by a quiet and sometimes indifferent routine, were now animated by a spirit of vigilance and rigor. Every employee knew that a customer, regardless of their status, had to be treated with respect and professionalism. Clara Bennett was still closely monitoring the situation. The report sent by Margaret Ellis, the new CEO, detailed every training session, every incident resolved, and the measures taken to prevent any recurrence. Clara noticed that even the agents most resistant to change were beginning to take the new procedures seriously. But the real impact extended far beyond the company walls. VIP customers, who had once hesitated to book with Sky Global, returned with renewed confidence. Social media was flooded with positive testimonials about the quality of service and the responsiveness of management. Clara, without seeking glory, saw her lesson come to fruition. An isolated incident had transformed an entire industry into a model of professionalism. At the same time, the press published in-depth analyses. Aviation industry experts pointed out that Clara's leadership had sparked a quiet revolution within Sky Global. Some competing companies were even beginning to revise their own standards, inspired by the precedent Clara had just set. One evening, Clara received an unexpected call from Margaret Ellis. "Ms. Bennett, I simply wanted to thank you. Thanks to you, our company is better. You have shown that even a single action can bring about lasting change." Clara smiled and calmly replied, "Margaret, it wasn't a question of gratitude. It was a question of respect and competence. You made the right decisions, and that's what matters." That evening, Clara allowed herself to relax. Sky Global had been transformed, not by fear, but by determination and vigilance. And in the business world, this story would be told as that of a woman capable of moving mountains simply by standing up for what is right. But Clara knew one thing remained true: in every victory, vigilance was essential. Principles are never guaranteed, and respect must always be defended. Several months had passed since the incident that had shaken Sky Global. The airline had undergone a profound transformation. Every department, every employee, now knew that respect for the customer was not optional but an immutable rule. Clara Bennett continued her usual activities, but the business world viewed her differently. She was no longer just a powerful CEO, she had become a symbol of leadership, determination, and demanding respect. The story of her confrontation with Sky Global was recounted in conferences, business schools, and specialized articles as a perfect example of the impact a single person could have when standing up for their principles. At Sky Global headquarters, the change was palpable. Margaret Ellis had not only implemented strict procedures, but she had also instilled a culture of accountability and respect. The new staff was trained to treat each customer with the same attention Clara had demanded. The company was regaining confidence, and profits and customer loyalty were beginning to reflect this transformation. One evening, Clara received an unexpected message from Samuel Carter, her predecessor. "Clara, I wanted to tell you. I've learned more in a few weeks than I ever would have learned in 10 years. Thank you for opening my eyes." Clara smiled. She knew it wasn't about revenge or punishment, it was about principles. "Samuel, this isn't about gratitude. It's about respect. Keep that in mind." As she hung up, Clara felt a deep sense of satisfaction. What she had accomplished went far beyond a simple mishap at the airport. She had shown that determination, patience, and strategy could transform entire organizations. The business world learned a lesson that day: underestimating someone, even for a simple airline seat, could be costly. But above all, the right action, carried out intelligently and calmly, could transform not only an airline, but inspire an entire industry. And for Clara Bennett, it wasn't just a personal victory. It was a victory for all those who believe that respect, excellence, and competence are never negotiable.